So the title of this video is something like Darling in the Franxx, but good. And I will admit that's a little bit clickbaity. I mean, it's not wrong, but it also isn't really what I mean. In the fact that maybe you should take it literally, as in I'm still going to be talking about Darling in the Franxx, but I want to talk about the good version of Darling in the Franxx. So, Darling in the Franxx came out a couple years ago. It's a pretty big deal when it came out. I remember specifically, I wasn't super into anime at the time, but I remember when Darling in the Franxx came out, I remember hearing about it. Um, it was kind of a period where I wasn't really watching anything. I was a fan of the stuff I had already seen, but I wasn't watching anything new. But I remember hearing about it, which was surprising because I hadn't really heard about anything in a while, like anything big, and it was kind of massive. And this was coming from someone who at the time had not seen Evangelion. I might have seen Gurren Lagann. I think I actually did. I don't remember if maybe. I don't know. Let's say I did. I had seen Gurren Lagann, but I hadn't seen Evangelion yet. So it's not from like a big, like, the fans of the stuff that Darling in the Franxx was inspired with. So I wasn't even like anime adjacent to it. It came out, it was great. And then the great collapse, which even I remember happening as the show falls apart. It's still tough to think about. Um, I do think the show gets a little bit overhated. I think when you put out a show that's 95% good and has a bad ending, that last two episodes are bad, people tend to forget about everything they liked before. But obviously a bad ending can leave a bad taste in your mouth, especially with Darling in the Franxx, where it's like 6 episodes maybe that are bad towards the end, and it's a tough to get through, I'll be honest. So let's talk about what is the good version of Darling in the Franxx. Well, there's a manga, and it's a manga original, not an anime original, as in it's based on the anime, but it's not a one-to-one adaptation. So a lot of times when stuff comes out with an anime first, think stuff like Gurren Lagann, Kill la Kill, that were anime products first, Code Geass. They usually get a manga adaptation later, and those vary in one-to-one adaptations as best as they can to, they take some creative liberties. And Darling in the Franxx took a lot of creative liberties, as it was written by the same person. So initially the first volume is pretty much, I think, the same, dead on, as it's meant to sort of be an ad for the series. You're supposed to read the manga, it's supposed to give you some insight on what you're going to get into in the anime. But immediately after that, they start to make some shakeups I really like. Now, what I want to attempt to do in this video is convince you to read it without really giving you any specific information. And the reason for that is because I went in blind, and as someone who had watched Darling in the Franxx, it did not feel like I was reading the same thing I had already watched. It felt super fresh, and I don't want to give any of that away. So I'm going to try and be very general with how I am describing things. Let me just say, the first thing I want to note is, before you get your hopes up, the ending is relatively similar, as in it's still, obviously I'm spoiling the ending, okay, but you still are kind of going from point A to point B in this story. It does not take a drastic turn. It's still Darling in the Franxx, but it does omit a lot of the most egregious elements from the last couple episodes of the show, um, in my opinion. So if there's some stuff you really don't like that happens, there's a chance they don't bring it back. There's still a couple things I think they had to keep in because they needed to keep the same story structure. I feel like the author was kind of locked in, like, okay, we need to go from point A to point B. And in order to get to point B, they still had to make it a little messy. As a whole, though, I just think it's better. Now, I'm not going to say for every character it's better. Out of the core, 8 characters, I would say some of them come off a lot better, but unfortunately, for some characters to get better characterization, when you have a limited amount of time to give characters, some of them just have to suffer. So I will say specifically Goro, has I'd say he's not like a bad character, but more he just doesn't, a lot of his moments to shine are either, like they change it, or, he's just not as prevalent as a character. Like, he was probably the 4th most important character in the anime, and maybe he still is, but it's 4th by a distant mile. I had to stop there. I had a fear that I'd messed up his name. I think it's Goro. I had to look it up. Imagine I'm still wrong. Okay, but let's talk about the character who kind of went from my least favorite, everyone's least favorite character, to the best character. That's Ichigo. Now, I don't want to get into specifically what they changed about her, but they kind of do a lot of housekeeping where it's like anything that was kind of annoying with her in the anime, they change. Like I said, she still has to kind of be the character that, she was written to be initially, but that doesn't mean she isn't written better. She can be the best version of that. And I think that's what she was. Another one would be Ikuno and Futoshi, who I think that's their names. They're like the two irrelevant ones, I think are better characters in the sense that are more active participants in the plot and not just, the last two characters. They kind of got to drag through everything. Another one's Mitsuru. I think he actually gets a good arc. Sort of a lot of the promises that we were promised with him as a character, a lot of his anger felt misplaced, but it feels like he comes to terms with his situation a lot better and sort of becomes someone who's a little bit annoying, but you want to root for, unlike with the anime where, I think he eventually comes around, but it feels like a lot of the stuff that he was just angry about, it was never fulfilled. It was never just like, kind of like he was angry and it's like, okay, I'm not angry anymore, without anything really being solved. But it feels like this time around, there's a great scene at the end of the manga, like I vividly remember that really stuck with me that I was like, man, this is pretty sick. If you read the manga, maybe you know what I'm talking about, but he's just a good character. I think in terms of Hero and Zero Two, they're all pretty much the same. I mean, they were probably the two best parts of the anime, in my opinion, their relationship, and both of them are good characters. I think obviously Zero Two, but also Hero, I think was a good character. And they stay as good characters. You think Hero would be a character they would, if they change everything, they would have to make changes to his character, but he was pretty similar. In terms of the other characters, uh, like I'm probably forgetting like there's probably like one person. Like just everyone else is kind of the same. I will say there's some like minor characters which I won't get into because I don't really want to spoil who become more relevant and I think live up to the potential that they kind of had in the anime. And that was cool to see. Once again, you might know who I'm talking about. I feel like I've said a lot of nothing here without saying much. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is the Darling in the Franxx manga is a good product. It is, I just pre-ordered the first two volumes that are being published in English. Like, that's pretty high. Like, I don't own a lot of I don't own a lot of manga physically, and the fact that I liked it that much, I always think back that I don't think it's objectively one of the best things I've ever read, but it was just a good ride, man. It was just like, I don't know if I would have enjoyed it as much had I read it before watching the anime because maybe it feels like retribution, kind of like how reading a Kame ga Kill after watching the anime just feels a lot better because you're like, man, they did not do a good job, but kind of the opposite, where it's like it's not that the adaptation was wrong, it's like they did a good adaptation of it, which is like how often can you think of like where people say the adaptation is the better version? Like I rarely hear people say that. I think another reason I wanted to make this video is because I think people just don't know that the manga is different. Like I hear people like when I say it's one of my favorites, they just assume it's a one-to-one adaptation. I have to say no, it's different. It's very different. Not very different. It's significantly different. So I kind of just wanted to bring attention to the fact that it's a different product and it is worth your time. Um, it's something I would just give a shot. I would read the first two volumes would be about what I would, because I think by the second volume issue, you'll kind of see some significant changes in the story that I think will intrigue you. I can't think of anything specific. I'm not going to lie. I just remember after I got through after I read the first volume, which is kind of almost like a recap, the beginning of the anime, and then you get to the second volume, and I'm like, okay, this is getting interesting. Like I liked what these characters, I like these characters, I like the world, but it's like, can they actually put it together to have a good plot? And I felt that they could. And, I'm here to say I think they did. And honestly, I think it is worth anyone's time who felt wronged by the anime, especially.